Oh, hey, it's morning.
Good. Okay. First of all, we're actually going to cover some things that we covered last time. First of all, I realized I've done a horrible job of pacing myself. Last week, I wanted to cover 47 points, and this week I only wanted to cover 6. So I definitely got to work on pacing myself. So what I want to do is, I was planning on going into Tower of Babel today, but I want to go ahead and go back to some post-flood stuff. Number one, we now can look at our dried flood, check out some things there, and then some of these items here, I just kind of blew through them as you were trying to walk out, so that was just a really bad idea on my part. So I want to cover those, and then cover Tower of Babel. And then part of some of the problems I had last week is really all this stuff ties together. Okay, what? Thank you. We'll look at that soon enough. The flood, the Tower of Babel, there's a lot there with humanity and what humans were like before, what humans were like after, and there's a lot I was trying to cover. So what's going to probably also happen is I'm going to end up reiterating some things just to tie in what happened with humans at the Tower of Babel, comparing to before and after the flood. So some of it may sound slightly repetitive, but it's a good way for you to remember it. So, wait. So I guess first of all, let's go back to our flood here. I drained all the water. And I had to use a siphon, so I got some in my mouth, and it was really gross. So I hope you all appreciate the effort I took for this class. Now the thing I'm realizing is I don't know how many of you got to look closely, but William, do you remember how many animals and people we had in here? There was 20, 30?
Yeah, I'm saying around 30.
Okay. For those of you who did get to see it before I started dumping incredible large amounts of water in here, there was, I'm sorry, what do you say, 20 or 30?
Yeah.
Okay. There was a lot. 25. 27. There was 27 animals and people in here. And the ground was very flat and kind of boring, and everybody was just kind of standing around. Then when I dumped my water in here, part of what I wanted to get you guys to understand is, like I made mention last week, I think we all think of the flood as, well, it just rained, it filled things up, and then the water went away. It was very disruptive, very cataclysmic. On a very, very, very small scale here, we've got some recreations of what was actually happening in the scene in the flood. Number one, you'll see that, well, everything's dead. But number two, you can only see maybe 10 of the 27 animals and people. Because they have all been buried down in our sediment here. You'll also see it's no longer flat. We have a valley here. That valley is from, I apparently was pouring all the water directly in the middle, but similar concept when the waters came pouring, when things started drying out and dams broke, there was a lot of water going that completely covered the ground, completely changed the ground. What also happened, because the dirt came from here, it had to go somewhere, it's now gone up here. So then my two sides are also higher. And I should have now, thinking about it, I should have drawn what the level was, but I want to say the level was probably somewhere about here on the aquarium when we started. So now this is about twice the height, and this is a little more than half the height. But this is a very small representation of what actually happened. This looks nothing like the aquarium did when I started. I've now got a valley. I've now got much higher places. Those higher places could have, during the flood, could have just come from sediment being dropped places. But also with the earthquakes, volcanoes, the earth was in great turmoil. So I mentioned last week that most likely the earth was relatively flat before the flood. During the flood, with all the turmoil, the continental plates shifting, then that's when we were seeing mountains and other things happening. So then, since the flood, the earth has been much less flat. I am not necessarily going to say that there were absolutely no mountains, but the mountains generally are formed from the continental plates coming together and then bending up to make a mountain. And those continental plates are greatly catastrophic and greatly violent, and in a perfect world, they're probably, in a perfect world as God originally created it, there probably aren't continental plates slamming into each other, because that just doesn't sound so perfect. But not to say he didn't make hills or mountains or whatever, but there are definitely more, the mountains that we see today would be post-flood. The other thing, as I said, a lot of our people and animals are all buried. One thing evolutionists want to try to say is that when they find fossils, that something just happened to fall over and die somewhere, and it just laid out in the sun, and then it got dried up, and then eventually buried, and then eventually turned into rock and fossil. The thing is, if you leave something dead out long, it's gonna disappear. It's gonna rot. Scavengers are gonna come and eat it. It's just not going to stay intact. The only way to keep something intact is to completely bury it as it was. And as you can see, the flood, and my even very small version of the flood, was very, very good at burying things. All these fossils that Earth, or that the evolutionists want to claim are in the Earth, are actually going to be from the flood or from some other cataclysmic event, like a flood. They're just buried by the animals being buried in the flood like that, being buried in the water. That water is allowing the minerals in the ground around them to soak through into the bones and to petrify the bones. You're not, without a flood, you're not going to get fossils. And there are fossils all over the world. There are fossils of what appear to be the wrong kind of animals in the wrong kind of areas all over the world. Part of it is the Earth would have been a more temperate world when it started, so that it's, now we've got great variations. We've got really cold, like the North Pole and South Pole, and really warm areas. The Earth is thought to have been more temperate areas, so that kind of all over. So they're finding animal fossils in the North and South Pole. I guess not South North Pole, because there's no Earth there, but you know what I mean, up in the Arctic Circle. Excuse me. Other thing you want to take a look at, you can't see it real well. There's some a little bit here. You'll see stripes and lines here. They're probably most visible right here. What that is just, you saw I throw in multiple buckets of water. As different amounts of water in different directions of water come, different layers of sediment get laid into different patterns. What happens is evolutionists see those lines and say, oh, well, this line was what the top of the Earth was however many millions of years ago. Then it built up, and then here was the next line. And then they'll look at that and they'll try to say, oh, well, that shows that the Earth is hundreds of millions of years old, when obviously this fish tank is not hundreds of millions of years old. I made all that in about 30 seconds just by slopping a lot of water in and letting it settle. That's what you'll also see. All over the world, there are layers of sediment because of the different, as the water came, filled the Earth, as the water drained off, you ended up with different layers. And then what happens is those layers will harden, and harden that way. Which is slight aside, which is interesting, that you'll often find trees, dead trees, that puncture all those layers. What happens is when you have flooding, and they saw this in Mount St. Helens, when you have massive flooding, trees get uprooted, but when they're floating vertical because the roots are heavier in keeping the bottom of the tree, so it's floating vertical. Well, they eventually sink and drag down into the ground. What happens if, here's my floating tree. Looks suspiciously like a pencil, but it's really a floating tree. Let's see how soft this still is. What happens is in that tree that's floating, it sinks, and then it goes down through multiple layers because it's soft enough for it to sink down. Well, what happens is then this then becomes a problem for evolutionists because then they'll find stuff like that is gone through multiple layers. Well, if this layer was laid 1 million years before that, how did this tree go all through those layers? And the only explanation that can be is that the trees sunk down in there while all the ground was soft at the same time, not that there were millions of years that lapsed between each of the different layers.
How do they explain that then? They just don't?
Don't. Yeah. They just don't. Some freak of nature or something.
They get embarrassed.
Yeah. Yeah. Because then what happens is then that tree then also then becomes petrified. So now you've got a tree, or other items that are crossing, that are going past, quote, geological ages and is petrified. And there is no evolutionary explanation for that. Because if that was really laid down over millions of years, if you're tired and want to go somewhere else and lay down, if it were millions of years and that was rock hard, they could have never punctured or gone through it. So they have no explanation for that. And that's, I mean, for that matter, also the whole concept of fossils. The claim is that it just laid there undisturbed for a very long amount of time. They're finding fossils. Actually, I think the Creation Museum has one where it's a fossil of one fish eating another fish, and they both became fossilized. That it's something that happened very suddenly. They were in the middle of lunch, and now 8 bajillion gallons of water were dumped on water and mud were dumped on their head. There's a fossil representation of 2 dinosaurs fighting, that they were actually in the middle of trying to kill each other, and then, well, they both died. Again, dumped on a bunch of mud. You're not going to get that kind of fossilization from something just falling over and dying and then waiting millions of years for it to get covered up. The only way you're going to get the fossils that you see in the earth are from being buried rapidly fast enough that the oxygen can't get to it, that can cause it to rot and decay, and enough water in it that then the mineralization process can happen and it can become petrified. And I wish I had it. This is why I never loan books out anymore. I had some books one time, and one of the books is really cool because they talked about they'd actually found a whale fossil where the whale was face down in the ground. So basically the whale was standing up here. We're just gonna unbury him. So it was a whale fossil, but the whale was like that in the ground. So obviously that whale had become trapped and fossilized in that position, because if a whale is going to die, it's not going to die standing up on its nose. Or at least it's not going to fall to the bottom of the ocean and remain standing up on its nose for millions of years while that fossilization can happen. One other thing I want to throw out in here, this starts getting, a couple of things starts getting kind of nuanced. I mean, you can see then in some of these areas, little air pockets have formed. That can be places where either like oil or water can trap. The other thing you really have to see from up top, but you'll see there's like lines and ridges and stuff like that. Scientists can actually tell by looking at how things like these lines and ridges form on whether they were actually formed by wind or by water. And there's a lot of places where there's on the earth where there's these kind of, if you want to say, patterns, and as they check them, as they test them, they try to claim, oh, it's millions of years of the wind blowing. But the way those lines and patterns have actually formed, they look closely at them, they're all formed by water. And it's amazing that they can, I don't have that kind of attention to try to figure out if that pile came from water or wind, but there's just ways they can tell by the shape of the sand, by the lay of the sand, by the angle of the lines. It's wild, the stuff that they can actually determine. That's stuff that you'll also find. That evolutionists just absolutely do not want to accept a global flood, because that means that the Bible would have to be true. So they try to come up with every way they can figure out to not be a global flood. And I think that's the highlights I was gonna cover on this. Sure.
And unburied people.
Let's not get into that right now.
But first I want to see if that's a plant or not. Do you think this is a plant that's growing? The green thing?
I kinda hope I'm not growing stuff in my aquarium right now, but I guess
Oh, that'd be cool.
it's possible.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
When they talk about, and maybe they've had this in their classes already, like sedimentary rock,
Mm-hmm.
metamorphic rock, igneous rock,
Mm-hmm.
how does that fit in with the flood?
Well, obviously, a large, if not all, of your sedimentary rock would have been created during the flood, because it was just literally sediment that laid down and then dried hard. I'm in the process of kind of, sort of making sedimentary rock right there, but it probably will never get that hard. And then I can't remember the difference between the two other types of rocks. I know one of them is volcanic, which obviously would have volcanic rock there. But volcanic rock is being made all the time. Actually, back to my favorite, Mount St. Helens, there new rock was being made during that volcanic eruption, which then can get into showing problems with carbon dating, because then they date the rocks that were just created at Mount St. Helens, and they're dated at ridiculously millions of years. And they know they were just formed in 1980, because that's when the volcano erupted, and that's when the lava cooled to become a rock. So yeah, I think we'll get more into dating and accuracies later, but yeah. And the other type of rock, I cannot remember for the life of me. So I'm just going to ignore that and keep on.
Metamorphic rock.
Yes, but which is so igneous is volcanic? I can't
Yeah.
remember. Okay. And I don't remember what metamorphic is.
I don't
Zoe, do you know, have you learned that in class yet, the different kinds of rock?
No.
Okay.
I have.
Well, then please share us.
Yes.
What's metamorphic rock? Help me out here, man.
I mean, we did in fourth grade, but I forget. Metamorphic
No, I think it's third grade.
is
She didn't do it yet, fourth grade.
I am in fourth grade. So metamorphic rock, igneous rock, metamorphic rock, igneous rock, and sedimentary.
How is metamorphic rock made? That's part of me can't remember.
Metamorphic rock is like the type of stuff that is slowly formed over short but long periods of time.
Okay. Well, we may have to find a better definition of metamorphic rock then. I would assume metamorphic rock would also be something, either rock that was originally during the creation week and either brought up because of volcano or because of the incredible pressure and water and stuff during the flood. I don't know. I'll make myself a note to find out that.
Well, I guess I'm just wondering if when the
Oh.
flood happened is
It's
when
a
we
piece of
really
volcano.
got those different classifications of rock.
Another.
Obviously, it sounds like sedimentary for sure.
Yeah.
And obviously with volcanoes happening, like
Right,
you said, and
right.
earthquakes happening. So I'm just wondering if that's when. Do you know what I'm saying?
That I don't know for sure. I would definitely say the perceived layers, that would have happened during the flood.
Right.
I'm assuming there are already different types of rocks. I mean, I don't think it was necessary that there was no sedimentary rock. I don't know. Maybe not. That's a good question. I mean, depending on what's needed to create sedimentary rock. I mean, obviously there would have been no global flood, and at the beginning of the earth there would have been no flooding. So whether there would have specifically been sedimentary rock, or if there would have just been soil on top of the bedrock, that's some question, and I do not know the answer. I'll have to see if I can find some answers on that. Okay. No, really no. Don't get ahead. Okay. So as we, just to kind of reiterate, from last week. I mean, with all that water, I mean, we've got continents moving, we've got the canyons being carved, we've got thousands of feet of sediment in a short amount of time, which is interpreted as ages. Left behind millions of cubic miles of new rock and fossils, and massive volcanoes exploded all around the globe. So, yes.
And the ark was not cute.
And the ark was not cute. Yes. You go, girl. And as a little aside, my ark is still right side up, but I don't remember. I think we had to flip it back over after all.
Yeah.
Because I think pardon?
This is the thing up there. It says
That's right. Don't you forget. You remember to stop and think about the ark, and then stop and think about everything. You will do well through life. Because unfortunately, too many times we as humans, we just hear something and just assume it must be true because somebody's told it or we've heard it more than once. So we got to stop and think about it. Okay. Wow. Okay. Well, maybe I'm not going to cover as much as I wanted to cover. We may still blow through all this post-flood stuff again. So I guess these are the things that I thrown at you right before you were leaving last time. Let me reiterate them here because probably didn't get to absorb them anyways. Obviously, that much water filling the earth and covering the earth was a desolate wasteland. I mean, there just was nothing growing or alive. The thing is, much like with Mount St. Helens, the evolutionists were stunned because how fast life came back. Seeds that were buried, animals coming back, and it was about, I think they said it was about 10 years that for being Mount St. Helens area being completely devastated of all life, half the mountain being blown away, lava, rocks, canyons, everything, that like within 10 years it was basically back to normal. That God has created in plants and animals an amazing ability to be able to repopulate and retake over the area. It was interesting, some of the stuff. I mean, some animals come in and they start digging holes and burrows. I can't remember, it was a groundhog or something like that. But then the birds come in and all of them bringing different seeds and stuff.
And there's even a type of a tree, and I can't remember which tree it is. I'm thinking some kind of a evergreen tree that it actually, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Not directly related to this. Although I guess there probably would have been fires, but I assume what Mrs. Forsyth is going to bring up is an amazing tree that God made that only drops its seeds after a fire. That the tree will get completely burned up. The pine cones are like these little fireproof time capsules that once the forest burns down, these pine cones fall off and actually the seeds are still fine and actually grow new trees, which just completely boggles and befuddles evolutionists thinking, because I mean that's obviously God's plan and handiwork for preparing for the eventuality of a fire, being able to regrow trees in an area where there was a fire. Yes?
And the pine cones are basically actually like a tube because after a fire they open up.
There you go. Thank you. Apparently my whole family is aware of this. I'm so proud of y'all. Okay, so the air would have still been clouded with volcanic dust. The working theory right now is that there was actually an ice age shortly after the flood, basically with all the volcanic dust, would have cooled the earth down. So when you hear evolutionists talk about ice age, yes, we as creationists agree there was an ice age. We obviously don't agree when it was or how long it was. The ice age we would have had probably would have been within a couple hundred years of the flood, and probably would have only lasted maybe 100 years. There were, I've read stuff where there was conceivably hurricanes and weather patterns that may have lasted for decades or even hundreds of years after the flood, just from how upset how much the balance of the atmosphere in the world was upset by all the activity of the flood. Let's see. Yeah, here, the nature and thickness of the sediment suggests that centuries of catastrophes continued to occur while the unstable earth was recovering from the violence of the flood. Again, it wasn't that the water just went down and now, oh look, we can move back into our house. No, you can't find your house because there's under thousands of feet of sediment. most of the genetic diversity from before the flood was lost. This is something, I need to just get a chart for that. I'm not going to take the time to draw all this. The Creation Museum has a great chart where comparing evolution and creation, what's the word I'm looking for? Genetic diversity. That with creationists, we say that on day 5 and 6, God created all the different kinds of animals. Say this was like the first dog, the first cat. And so then what happened is the genetic diversity as they breed and they come up with different types of animals. Remember that chart? Yes. So each different kind broke off into things. So dogs.
Did it evolve? They just.
Yeah. So dogs, you had your wolves and your coyotes and all that kind of stuff. Well, then what happened is then the flood happened, and Noah only took one of each kind on the ark. So you may have had hundreds, maybe even thousands of different, if you want to say, subspecies that literally were gone. That there may have been a particular type of dog here that kind was not taken on the ark, so that died off. So we may find that in a fossil record. It doesn't mean that it was a development to become this dog. It was just genetically an offshoot of that dog. Well, what happened then, as in we went forward from the flood, all this branch that we had, that branching had to start over again. So had there not been a flood, the amount of different species of each kind of animal would have been much broader. But at that point, for both people and humans, everything was cut off at the flood and started over again with the 8 humans that were on the ark and with each one kind of animal on it. Where, just as an aside, evolutionists try to claim you started way back here with one thing, which then branched off, and then you just end up with this forever branching tree that's just going on and on forever. Claiming that everything came from one original organism, where to try to come up with what they call the tree of life. The creationists often will call it what they call, I think, the forest of life.
Yeah.
Where each kind started with its own and then was basically cut off at the flood and then started over again. Which actually, while I'm playing on the board, the other thing I want to cover, I touched on this last week with when I was saying we don't know what technology was like before the flood. We don't know what all Noah had at his disposal for the flood. Let's see, how do I do this? Okay, let's call this time. If you draw a chart of time, say this is, let's say this is present day, and I can spell. And then we'll say this is creation. And for a biblical worldview, time actually starts here. I'm just starting back there to help make the argument that I'm going to try to say. We want to say a perfect human, I can spell today, would have been, say, here. That when Adam and Eve were created, they were created perfect. They were created perfectly in mind, body, and soul. Well, as time goes on, because of the fall, we are now descending in our abilities. Our genetic makeup, we are losing genetic purity because of mutations, because of death, because of things dying off. Our lifespans are getting shorter. Our abilities, and we think we've got so much because of computers and cars and things like that, but it's really actually just collected information that we as people are really not getting really any more impressive. Man, you ever want to think that? Look at stuff that was written even during the time of the Revolutionary War. I try to read that and I can't make heads or tails of that. Some of their sentences are like 400 words long and I can't even keep track of it. But so yeah, so as humans, we started out perfect as God made us. Let's say the flood happened here. We have no idea what humans were capable of. And this is something we really got to be careful of, because here's what happens. We unconsciously get stuck in the evolutionary worldview, and evolution says, well, men started out here, and human beings are going off on to something even bigger and better. So then when we here in the present look back, evolutionists want to say, well, 2,000 years ago, or well, I guess like the flood, 4,000 years ago, when the flood happened, Moses couldn't have been smart enough to know how to even pick up a rock, much less build a boat, because, well, sheesh. Pardon?
No, not Moses.
Thank you. I'm glad I'm not paying attention. Okay. I'm glad someone is. But the evolutionists want to say, well, there's no way Noah could have even been smart enough to build a boat, because, gosh, way back then, look how far we've progressed. That they didn't even know how to build tools way back then. Now, I mean, the Bible even talks about some of Adam and Eve's children already forging metal and yes.
And like in evolutionary worldview, they were like talking about cavemen.
Right. Yes. Cavemen. There's a good one. Were there cavemen? Yes. Because what are cavemen? Men who live in caves. So probably right after the flood, because all of their houses just got buried in a bunch of sediment, they were probably cavemen. But as you can see, and closer to perfection, they were probably still actually smarter and better than we were. They were not. Evolution wants to claim all these cavemen. They just come out of.
Just dumb.
They were Neanderthals.
Yeah, well, but
like
Neanderthals is a whole other topic. But yes, they had cavemen. Evolutionists want to claim, well, cavemen they just had turned from monkeys into people, so they couldn't figure out how to build tools or anything. So all they could do is live in caves. Well, no. After the flood, there was nothing there to work with or to live in, so they found holes in the ground and lived in them until they could start building and creating a new civilization after it had been completely wiped out before the flood. So this is something we've got to be really careful, because unfortunately, everything in the world claims that as the farther back in time you go, men, human beings, well, number one, weren't human beings. Number two, were really dumb and couldn't figure anything out, and discovered fire because of, I mean, all of this we knew and God knew, and we learned there from the beginning. Flip side then, you get over this way, evolutionists claim, well, we keep just getting better and better and better. And if you stop and look at the state of the world today, I think we could all argue against that. But the evolutionists claim, oh, well, we're going to even get even beyond perfect. We're going to be another type of human being, a homo superior or something they want to call it, whatever. But
we're going to build hover cars.
But they want to claim that, so here's the line of when God made people perfect. Evolutionists and humanists claim, well, we are going to even become more and better. And ultimately, the irony is they want to claim at some point we are going to evolve so much we are going to become godlike. So
we're going to become what like?
Godlike. The humans will evolve into what is being perceived now as gods. Which is pretty darn arrogant if you stop and think about it. But this is something you really got to stop and realize, because you're going to see this everywhere you go, anywhere you go. Even when you talk about history, even just in world history classes. World history wants to start if creation was, creation was 4000 BC. World history, they want to stop and talk and claim that humans started out 10 to 20,000 years ago and have slowly worked themselves up to this glorious point that we're at now. Whereas, again, quite the opposite. We have decayed, and if Christ doesn't come back soon, we're just going to keep decaying and it's gonna be really sad. Okay, I do not mean to get off that long on that tangent, so we still haven't hit the Tower of Babel. So I guess that's where and this is.
We only have like, I don't know, 7 minutes.
Yes.
6 minutes.
So.
Leah, were you here last week, hon?
Yeah.
You weren't here last week.
No. She was here last.
Okay, but you were here.
Oh, you weren't? Gosh. Well, then I'm glad I reiterated myself so much. Okay, then I'm not gonna try to rush ahead and cover Tower of Babel.
What about?
No, thanks, sir. Any questions on this? Anything that you've heard or people have told you otherwise or you don't understand or anything I can answer or cover there, or I'll just find something else to talk about? You choose or I choose?
Now, Leah, what school do you go to?
I will look at elementary.
You go to Rootstown, so you guys see each other at school sometimes? What are they teaching you in your science classes, your history classes?
We just we're learning about like planets, nothing like rocks.
Have you had evolution already in your textbooks at school?
No, we've been working on.
But the planets, do they talk about those being millions of years old?
Yeah, kind of.
How about you? Have you come across it at all?
I did experience how to use a battery and a wire in a light bulb and to make it work. We actually tried to do it. We actually do it. And we don't experience about gummy bears and they do with oil, wire. Ours are huge. We had a lot of experience.
You guys had history classes at all yet?
No, we don't. I think it's 6th grade. We started
So
history.
you haven't done any American history, world history?
And social studies last year. Social studies we did in 4th grade.
Okay.
We did like more of Indian. Yeah, Indians.
And did they talk about millions of years?
Hey, if Zoe wasn't here, let me run for a couple things and she wouldn't have seen. A couple things I tried to show last week was to show how big the ark actually was. This here is a satellite photo of our church as it is. That's the sanctuary, that's the hall with the ramp and nursery and stuff like that. To have the same amount of square footage as the ark, one floor, just to be as big as the ark, I'm not even counting all 3 floors, you'd actually have to add the sanctuary and that hallway again to have the church cover the same amount of area as the ark. Yeah.
On one floor.
On one floor.
And there
So
were 3
then,
floors.
so then there's 3 of these. Yeah, stacked on top of each
Is
other.
that actually how like huge it is? Like
Yes. Yeah.
it's not
If the
disgusting.
I was actually hoping to take us outside, but then it went and got cold. Where's my shirt?
It's not that cold. Not too cold. It's only 0 below. You said it was hot out. It's about 40 maybe.
If you, I was gonna actually take you guys outside. If you go all the way to the edge of the road there and go all the way to the end of the parking lot, that's how long the ark would have actually been. And then between the width would have between the church and the
What road?
ball court. That's Talmadge Road. Yeah, so it's
that's
facing this
Talmadge
way.
Road.
That one would be really easy to sink.
No, it would not.
Oh. Usually
And
the
all
big
of
things flip.
Pardon?
Usually when if they're too big, it gets too heavy and top heavy.
Yeah, and because of the dimensions of the ark, it was actually very, the ark would have been 45 feet tall, and scientific models have shown that it could have either handled waves that were either 90 to 200 feet tall because of the dimensions of the ark, the comparison of the height and the width and the length.
They said it could have handled waves 90 to 200
90 to 200 feet tall.
So they're not exactly sure, but somewhere in that range.
Yeah, I've seen different ranges of different studies. But so
Can you imagine
waves twice as
encountering-
tall as the Ark.
Yeah,
Or-
a wave that tall.
Yeah, or 5 times as tall as the Ark. Another way you can think of the Ark is that the Ark the Ark in a full capacity would have had the equivalent storage of 569 boxcars. So as I told people, next time you see a train go by, count cars and you'll see how long, because there's no train that's going to be 569 boxcars. It'll probably be 100 or so. But then to point out that the Ark was big enough for all the animals. Yeah, and the Ark held 569 of them. And depending on they've also tried to figure out how many animals that needed to be on the Ark. And the number of animals that needed to be on the Ark ranges anywhere from 2,000 to 145,000. But if you're only talking the kinds, like I talked about, like one dog kind, one cat kind, that could have been as few as 2,000 animals on the Ark. If you actually take all known species, both living and extinct, and also including dinosaurs, because dinosaurs would have been created on day 6 and would have still been around during the flood, then that would have been 145,000. Now, if you needed the full 145,000 animals, which is highly unlikely, those 145,000 animals would have fit into 318 boxcars. So you still would have had 240 boxcars left over just for food and water and places for people to live and stuff like that. So there was more than enough space on the Ark to cover all the animals. And that's something because too many times people envision the Ark being cute. They say, well, there's no way that could have handled could have held all the animals. Well, the Ark was not cute.
That would probably only hold about 5 animals.
Yeah.
And it would probably be a little top heavy.
And the first wave would come across, that thing would have been turned over and sunk.
Everybody's dead.
Yeah. Which is made for a very short Bible.
We wouldn't even be here to read it. There
That's
wouldn't
right.
even be people to write it.
That's right. Let's see, I'm trying to think what other. And I guess I did already touch on that. I mean, people say, well, Noah could have never built an ark like that because back then humans were too stupid to try to figure out how to do something. Well, that's evolutionary. They were much smarter than we were today. We have no idea what technology or how Noah did it. There's also nothing that says in the Bible specifically that Noah built the ark by himself. He very well could have hired people. I mean, we say we built this church. Pardon?
Like me.
Not quite sure I followed, but okay. But they very well could have hired people to build the ark. I mean, we built this church. It's not that only the elders built this church. We hired other people to build the church. The tools and the abilities that they would have had, we don't really know because it all pretty much would have been buried under all that sediment. I guess one of the things I'll say that I'll tell Zoe then also that, I mean, lifespans were much longer before the flood. I mean, Adam, Methuselah, all of them, I mean, they lived to be 900 years. One of the things that I had heard Ken Ham say when I first saw him back in '89, he made the point and said, if you live to be 400, 500, 600, 900 years old, imagine.
Oh, jeez.
Pardon?
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. Well, but we would have had better bodies, so we would have not looked like our bodies would have not aged so fast, so we would have been 600 years old and probably looked better than I look now. Don't read into that. But at that point, I mean, the point that Ken Ham made, if you live 600 years, you could take 100 years off to learn how to play piano. Think how good you'd be at playing piano if you got to practice for 100 years. I mean, these are things, yeah, I would not be a big fan of that myself, but hey. But these are things that we don't even stop and think about.
Played with Legos for 100 years.
That for the lifespans that we had, think of it, our entire industrial revolution was only 200 or 100 years old. I mean, when do you want to say industrial revolution was? Late 1800s, early 1900s. So in less than 200 years ago, every invention that we take for granted, horses, cars, airplanes, all that is less than 200 years old. These people were living 3, 4, almost 10 times that, well, almost 5 times that, if we're talking 200-year span. So we just have no comprehension of what civilization, what humans were like and what civilization was like that long ago. Because, I mean, imagine if you could spend hundreds of years learning something, you would know it really, really well.
Wasn't Methuselah?
Yeah,
He lived to be 969,
yeah.
and wasn't he the oldest
Yes.
person who
Yeah.
lived
And I
ever?
think Adam was recorded at like 930 or something like that.
Okay.
So he was a spring chicken compared to Methuselah. But that's just something, pardon? 930, yeah. So that's something we've got to stop and think about is, again, we're decaying. They were living so much longer. I mean, think of it even this way. I mean, think of the things that, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but the things that we as humans have created that we ended up finding out were dangerous and we had to stop using. And for that can take us sometimes 20 or 40 years. I mean, they lived long enough, they could have figured out something was dangerous and stopped using it, where that can take an entire generation for us. I mean, we may find out, I mean, I use smoking as an example because that came to the top of my mind. 70 years ago, people touted smoking as a health thing, that it would help calm you down and help you feel better, and it was wonderful and great. Now it's like you can't even talk about smoking or show smoking even in a movie because of how horrible and terrible it was. Well, that's 50 to 70 years, think of how many people have died of lung cancer and stuff like that, where if you had 900-year lifespans, it only took you 50 years to figure something.
From using things, cigarettes and stuff so much.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, our lifespans are so short that it takes us sometimes more than a lifespan to figure out that something's bad. Their lifespans were so long, it only took them 1/10 or 1/20th of their life to figure out that something was bad and stop doing it. So we've just got no idea how smart, how intelligent, what they built civilization-wise, and we're not really ever going to know until we get to heaven and learn about it. But we've got to be very careful not to be pulled into the evolutionary mindset, thinking that, well, really long ago they were really stupid. No, really long ago they were really smart. We're the stupid ones, and evolutionists just don't want to climb that. They want to climb the moral path even better and better. That if we just do right by their worldview, that we can become gods. And we are running over, so I will stop, and I guess we'll do Tower of Babel next week, and we'll get there eventually.
Why is there